Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We are coming to you live from these United States of America. I'm here in Des Moines, Iowa, where I am the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Director of the Zeta Institute for Foundation and Ethics and Leadership. You can find both of those at mchs.edu and zetainstitute.com. Bud is out there in Pittsburgh, America, where the trifecta of rivers come together. Bud, what do you do at the confluence of all of these waters?
These days I'm directing the National Institute for Newman Studies, also known as NINS, and you can find more about all that we do at newmanstudies.org.
So, if you're around either place, you might see Bud and I walking around. We're on the air in Iowa and Oklahoma, and then, of course, on the Internet, anywhere you get good service, Iowa Catholic Radio and the Iowa Catholic Radio app. Bud, how are you doing this week?
I've been doing pretty well. I heard a radio show host here describe the weather recently as San Diego in December, which that was like his vision of what's amazing San Diego in December. So I guess that's us. But even though it's been like a little bit cooler than I think average is, my kids used their Christmas money, to get a pool pass this year, and the pool near our house is heated.
What?
Talk about privilege.
Yeah.
Growing up, I did not have access to a heated pool, so if it was like 68 in June when I was young, you just had to grin and bear it.
Oh, that's right. Well, and you wouldn't even grin. It's more like grimace or have all of your muscles contract as you sink to the bottom.
Back when I was a kid, we walked up hills 3 ways and froze at the pool.
I remember that was the big worry each summer where our pool was, is if they had the cracks from the year before fixed. Because if they did, the water would, just stay and the sun would heat it. But if not, they had to get a good old hose and they'd refill it every day. And that water would be yowzers cold.
Yeah.
And so I guess you'd think like, well, if it's like 100 outside, wouldn't it be great to have absolutely freezing water? But your body actually says no.
Well, and I feel like we had better music at the public pool. I have this theory that pool music, every place has its own distinct musical culture. So you go to the doctor's office,
right.
The dentist's office, it's very like relaxing, almost like elevator music.
Right.
I think pool music is oftentimes like maybe 7 years behind pop culture. So when we were swimming, it was like groovy 80s tunes and Journey and stuff like that.
Right, but as loud as possible so that it can like play over everything. Yeah. If we would be like radio disc jockeys from the 80s pool stuff, like people would just immediately turn the dial because it would be like overdriving their stereos and everything. Reminiscing with Bud and Bo.
Yeah.
We'll be back after this. Okay, well, something we should reminisce about and remember every time is we're underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences. So they're really in full swing for their summer, and that's what they always remember. You can join up anytime. We have starts in fall, spring, and summer. They go through the summer in order to get done quicker. mchs.edu, all sorts of ways that you can be a part of the Mercy College experience and get out there and help people in a field that matters.
But whenever you start talking about mercy, my mind goes to the show Cheers.
Okay.
I think Woody Harrelson was on that show. The little jingle, the theme song, Where Everybody Knows Your Name?
Yes.
As someone who's wandered the halls of mercy, I think it's fair to say that about Mercy College of Health Sciences. You're not just like a number or a face.
Well, it's also true. I mean, you can be like Bud, who's been gone a few years now, but like your face is still prominently there, and I still see other people wistfully talking to your pictures as if you're gone, but you're actually just in Pittsburgh. But they talk at your picture. That's not true, but I'm imagining that it'd be pretty great if they did that.
Do you still blame me for things in the classroom?
That
like
is
if
true.
You don't like the part of the syllabus?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
People are all like, "This is hard to understand." I was like, "Well, I told Bud that when he put it into the curriculum." But
when he chose this book, I knew it was going to run us into problems. Oh well, let us soldier on.
Yeah. No, I still was talking about getting a puppet and saying that it was Bud, and that then they would just freak out where I would be reciting your parts of the lecture. But that's a lot of work, Bud, and I can't throw my voice, so I did not choose to do that.
Well, I thought about Skyping you in for one of my classes here in Pittsburgh this last year, but I feel like you have to get Bo Bonner in person. Well, as I say that as we're about to start a radio show.
But it's radio, it's still the live energy. Well, with all of that live energy, what we're going to talk about today, if you look back at the episodes we've been having, Chris Arnauty, we've talked about, the difference between charity and philanthropy. All of these things started to butt up against the idea, I would think it'd be fair to say, Bud, that how do we make charity incarnational? How do we make it where beyond talking about problems merely, or only coming up with sort of abstracted solutions? How is it that we can truly be the body of Christ in and of the world? And so the only word we have is incarnation. We have to be incarnate, just like Jesus Christ, God incarnate. But then also really filling out what that is and how different modes of social organization fall short. So that's what we're going to try to unpack today.
Yeah, I think when you dig into a lot of the theological terms that we use, especially in the realm of moral theology, you start to drive at this point that you're getting across, Bo. Empathy, compassion, they all have to do with, suffering alongside, and of course the ultimate model for that is Jesus. So pretty psyched about today's show.
We'll be throwing out fun words that are hard for people to spell, Gnostic, bureaucracy. We don't have to spell them, we just have to say them. We throw that on Jimmy to, have to figure out how to go spell check those on Twitter and things like this. But that's what we're here for mostly is, yes, to talk about Jesus, but also to make Jimmy's life harder. So he's smiling at that. So stick around, the Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. When we get back from these messages, we'll be talking about incarnational ways to live out our faith as opposed to Gnostic ones. And, we'll be right back right after this. But if people want to ask questions, there's an easy way to do so. All they need to do is text into the ZipWhip line. 515-223-1150. That's 515-223-1150, the ZipWhip line. Always there, always available for you to make comments. If you want to leave us one after the show is done, hashtag UCG for the Uncommon Good so we can track it down and try to answer it on air. Bud, do you have any special questions you're requesting from people on the ZipWhip line today?
Ooh, if people could let me know Nebraska's final record after this year's football season.
Well, I think
I know that we coming mostly from Iowans, so I'll take it all with a grain of salt.
That's right. Yeah, so 515-223-1150 if you want to destroy Bud's dreams on the ZipWhip line. 515-223-1150. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. When we get back after these messages, we'll be talking about the Incarnation and its effect on social policy.
Is it time for a new roof? Then it could be time for you to get to know Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a roofing company entering its 30th year of business. They specialize in residential re-roofs, light commercial jobs, and have the experience to meet all of your roofing needs with personal service. With Bell Construction, the owner will come to your home or place of business in person to inspect and ensure the quality of work that you deserve. They pride themselves in working with you on a personal basis and making sure you are satisfied. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Impoverished children break everyone's heart, but poverty seems like such a big problem. What can one person do to make a difference? For 17 years, Blessman International's passion has been to connect the resources of our donors with sustainable programs that impact the lives of impoverished children in South Africa. Our donors are feeding thousands of hungry children every week, providing basic water and sanitation for impoverished communities, and sharing the love of God in practical ways every day. Go to www.blessmaninternational.org and make your donation today.
Thank you, Dental Associates, for underwriting Dowling Catholic Sports 365. With over 40 years' experience, Dental Associates is a group dental practice with the mission of promoting optimum health and well-being to all patients, providing preventative, restorative, and cosmetic dentistry for the entire family. Message underwritten by Dr. Kenton Gleichman, Dr. Steve Karbaka, Dr. Christine Mulcahy, and Dr. Ben Nagel. Dental Associates, addressing your smile, needs, and dreams. Online at Des Moines-DentalAssociates.com.
50 years ago, tuition costs at Catholic elementary schools were mostly absorbed by parishes. Now, higher salaries for lay teachers and new technologies have greatly increased the cost for families. Hi, I'm Jean Wells at the Catholic Tuition Organization, and my job is to reduce tuition costs for families and award great tax credits to generous donors. Want to help? Please donate today at ctoiowa.org. Let's do this for the kids and their future.
Welcome back to the Uncommon Good. This is Bo Bonner here with Dr. Bud Marr. Bud, today we said we're going to talk about the Incarnation. Now, what's funny is the reason we want to talk about being incarnational is we're trying to avoid being abstract. A while ago, we got to talk with Dr. William Kavanaugh, who talked about incarnation versus excarnation, right? This idea that we take embodied things and we abstract them so that they're no longer embodied, and that this doesn't imitate our Lord, who did not take being one with God as a privilege to be ignored, but instead he emptied himself, taking on the form of a slave, our form, so that he could live among us, die, and be raised so that we could have that hope as well. Now, the problem, of course, is when you start talking about something like incarnation, and you add that AL, that we need to be incarnational, the very problem is you yourself can make it an abstraction. And if it becomes an abstraction, paradoxically as it is, you undermine the very thing that you're trying to accomplish. So I think one of the things we wanted to do, in light of looking back at some of the people and interviews that we've had in talks, Chris Arnatti last week about his book Dignity, the week before about charity and its difference with philanthropy, just looking back even to Charles Camosi and what throwaway culture, that theme, it seems, has been a thread running through all of them. But we want to make sure that we don't end up making it just a mere abstraction to sound good and to, so to speak, get us off the hunt of what we actually should be looking for. So, Bud, what does it mean to be incarnational where we're not using it as a mere abstraction to get away from the implications of what it means?
Well, when we talked about the idea for this show, the first thing that came to mind for me is that this isn't flowery language. It's not like we're saying we want to just add something precious to what we're about. It really gets back to the heart of reality. And I think as Americans, where there's a prominent literary critic, Harold Bloom, and he says a lot of things that I disagree with. But one thing that he says is one of the major modes of religion in America has been Gnostic, which is kind of a denial of the flesh, or seeing the flesh as a burden and wanting to transcend it. And part of that has to do even with the dominant modes of worship in American society. But when you get into Scripture, you see from the very beginning that that God wanted to be with his people. And sin was a rupture in that relationship such that the mode of God's presence was now mediated through priest and through a temple. But with the coming of Christ, it says that Christ came in the flesh. And when John talks about that in the first chapter of his gospel, he says literally in the Greek that Christ tabernacled among humankind. So the Word became flesh and made up his tent or his tabernacle among us. And so for Christians, this isn't optional. It's not like, how do we do charity or how do we love others in sort of a spicy way? It really has to do with how do we imitate God, because we're called to take on the divine nature. So we're called to become like Christ, who shows us authentically what it means to be human.
Yes, and you brought up spiciness, and so this makes me, of course, think of food, one of my dominant modes of thought and running afoul of the grace of God. And what I think of when you talk about spiciness and the word incarnation is, of course, carne asada, the wonderful, wonderful meat that can fill tacos or all sorts of things as well. Now, the reason it's important to think of carne asada when you think of incarnation is because incarnation can sound abstract and clean and nice and clinical. But that word carne, right, it doesn't just mean meat or even like skin. It's flesh, right? Like carne asada, it's flesh, right? When you eat carne asada, it's wonderful and juicy. and it gets all over your face and hands if you're a messy eater like I am. And when you're, so to speak, have your hands in carne asada, it is undeniably incarnate, right? Like, it's there, it is fleshy, It is juicy. And the thing is, when we talk about Christ being incarnate, we have to have that reality as well. God didn't, become a hologram that sort of floated through human life. No, he was there, skin, bone, juice, blood, right? He is in the flesh, in that the dominant, really strong way of saying in the flesh. And so when we say we need charity that needs to be incarnational, against Gnostic, like you're saying, it needs to be fleshy. I always like to throw in juicy because that really kind of disturbs people, but that's where it has to be. It's the dirt and the grime of things walking around. And so this opposition between incarnational, when we keep in mind carne asada, incarnational, versus Gnostic. So Gnosticism gets its word from gnosis, which is a knowledge, right? The idea is if you just know something, you can escape this reality and you don't have to worry about the body. But Christ didn't choose to save us just through some knowledge. It's not that there isn't knowledge or wisdom, but it's connatural, as the scholastic would say, which means that it must be won through incarnational experience. You must experience it. It must be in the flesh that you come to this knowledge. And you think back the last few episodes we've had, this is exactly something like Chris Arnatti is saying, the front row. They believe a sort of Gnostic way that if we just got the right information, we can solve all these problems. But what they really need to do is, in the flesh, go talk to people. When you think about philanthropy versus charity, right, there's this idea that if we just have this certain sort of knowledge about what money we should give, we'd eliminate problems instead of actually being among the people to know in a connatural way what they need. And if you go all the way back to Camosi's book and talking about throwaway culture and everything else, it's not just a matter of getting a new political party. No, the problem is people think there are solutions to all of these problems, that it's just the right knowledge about what needs to be done away with. But actually what we need is people in the flesh, incarnational, in the juicy medium of human existence, understanding what it is that we have to be about to be the church.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Chris Arnatti's book, because I think that work, Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America, it really gets at the heart of what we're trying to draw out today. And Arnatti talks about the cognitive elites, like you said, those who, in our society, they have a lot of great ideas in their mind about the efficient way to deal with poverty. And I think if you see the journey that Arnatti's gone through, it's really through Chris, like, stepping out of a comfortable place and actually encountering people on the streets, that he went through a conversion process. And, I want to be careful, Bo, because there's a way where you can make this about practicality. So you and I have discussed, for instance, some of the pressing issues in Haiti, and there's an instance where the powerful and the governing bureaucracy said, we're going to build this dam to help, provide power to those who need it, but also as an economic boom. And the dam ended up destroying an ecosystem, basically because bureaucrats hadn't talked to the people who depended upon the river for their livelihood. And so there is a way where we can just get nuts and bolts and say, if we're not incarnational in how we encounter the world, we're liable to really screw things up. But it goes deeper than that, because in our faith, so you think about Catholicism and the heart of our Christian life, that being worship, Catholics have always said you can't encounter God and the fullness of God through spirit alone. Like, by God's providence, he said, I'm going to convey my grace to you through bread and wine and holy water and holy oils, right? Mm-hmm. And this gets into the way that we love. As human beings, if a child in the early development stages is deprived of touch, that can leave lasting psychological scars on folks. And so our love, and whatever place God calls us to, it has to be embodied. And just as we encounter the living God through communion, Jesus promises that we'll see him through those who are hungry, thirsty, and in need of clothing.
This reminds me, your point really hits an important marker that we have to make. Because when we talk about the problem with Gnosticism, it can always sound like we just mean esoteric knowledge or sort of like egghead, brainy mysticism. But actually, some of the worst Gnosticism is, like you said, brass tacks, realist, utilitarian pragmatism, right? That these ideas that seem like they're, very realistic still don't necessarily mean that they're incarnational. And this reminds me, when we go back thinking of the conversation, for instance, we had with Charles Camosi, we started to talk about how, acedia or sloth isn't the lack of wanting to do anything, right? So someone who is mired in acedia, the noonday demon, the sloth, is not going to look lazy. They're actually going to be distracted by busy work. They're going to be doing a lot of busy little things because they're not going to take the time to do the deep work of actually contemplating their place in the universe and things like this. And so, in the same way, it could look like, since these very pragmatic solutions aren't egghead, esoteric, ivory tower, that they must be incarnational, but actually it's something a lot more like sloth or acedia, where we get distracted by the busy work of technicalities, that we don't do the deep incarnational work of trying to figure this out. It's similar also when we go back to that discussion we had with charity and philanthropy. People think that the solution, right, is to not pity people, or they get obsessed with the idea of pity, but pity, right, is the emotion that naturally draws us to a crossroads. Do we do things to kill pity, to do away with it, which is truly Gnostic, right? Do we try to destroy, do things to get rid of our emotions so we can live this sort of Gnostic reality in our head? Or does pity draw us towards the person to that next step of an incarnational relationship where we're going to put skin in the game to try to help that person? And finally, of course, like you said, the book Dignity is rife with all of this. The most brilliant part, I think, of Chris's book was his unwillingness to say there's a solution when there's not one, and actually say that what we need to be doing before we even start talking about solutions is talk to the people in the midst of these difficulties, in the midst of the back row, to actually for once hear them and hear what they might have to contribute to a solution. And that goes back to your story about the Pellegrin Dam and the Arabon system in Haiti, is that if you're going to avoid doing something like creating a dam that you thought would be good for these people but destroys their livelihood, you have to be incarnational enough to walk around and talk to them. Not the two Gnostic, temptations, one of esoterically coming up with a sort of mystic solution with our egghead, sensibilities, nor with this, sloth-based busy work of pragmatic solution.
Well, and I think all of this gets back to, if we're going to witness to the gospel, these are not tangential questions. Our witness has to be grounded in a true understanding of human nature. And I think one thing that Chris's book shows is that so many parts of our society, and I think this harkens to the work of Alistair McIntyre as well, have moved to a place where our answers or our work is so much about efficiency and utilitarian goals, where actual human beings become statistics, and we begin to say, how do we produce a certain outcome? And what we have in mind is sort of like numbers on a page. I think through Chris's conversations that he had, he saw that a lot of times what he had construed as happiness didn't match the goals and the values of America's poor. Now, Bo, I'm not trying to say any definition of happiness just goes. Obviously, we have certain ideas about what constitutes the good, but I do think if you fall into the kind of Gnosticism that you're talking about, a lot of times the end result will be this kind of bureaucratic approach to human existence that doesn't incorporate things like what it means to be loved, what it means to call a place home. And I'm not saying those things in a sentimental way. I just know that Chris says at one point in the book that the one thing that the front row Americans provide to back row Americans is bureaucratic institutions. And he says to actually try to make it by as a poor person in America, sometimes you feel like a mice in a maze.
Right.
And one thing that churches provide that's different than that is they say, come as you are. Now God is calling you to a different place, but there are no forms that you have to sign along the way, so to speak. And I think that's beginning to drive at the heart of kind of the messiness and the good sense of the term, of what it means to be part of the body of Christ that's so different from the bureaucratic culture that defines so much of American life.
And, if we go back to what we were talking about Charles Camosy I think that goes into the great division that starts emerging in the political life of the United States. It's not so much about do we need to choose sides or, isn't it too bad that we can't get along? I mean, if we need to fight about things, we're going to fight about things. The disappointing thing, right, is the sort of bureaucratizing the concerns that we've sort of split up and, threw to the wolves on each side. So on one hand, we have people who decide their identity marker is to care for the poor, but what they mean is, and again, it's not just policy. Like, we have to have policies, but if the policy is here's the bureaucratic solution to poverty, then the other side starts to poke holes and say, like, see where you're missing the human element. But then we see this with the conservative side too. If pro-life just becomes a sort of like bureaucratic talking point instead of actually trying to do, like good work like people here in Des Moines with Intervisions do, where no, you need to encounter and speak and love individual people to try to deal with them. If instead we're just talking about bureaucratic solutions and mere laws, again, I'm not trying to bash all laws, but just merely laws, then the other side rightfully says, has stories about how you're missing the human element. And I think Camosy's book shows this brilliantly, that both sides are tempted to a sort of Gnosticism because there's people who benefit when we deal with things in a sort of abstracted way. And, I think this is where we're setting this up. We're getting ready to go to the break in 3 or so minutes. But the idea is bureaucracies that deal with things non-personally, non-incarnationally, and start sort of bloating themselves, their point starts to be their own existence rather than for the people that almost all of them initially set out to help. And I'm not bashing the idea that any institution isn't helping people, but that if we don't have that constant corrective about incarnationality, as we're saying, that's that's where it's going to go astray at.
At the end of the day, Catholic ministries have to think about keeping the lights on. That question can't be punted. And you and I have both joked on the show about how no one's going to make us a chief financial officer anytime soon. But sometimes I think as Catholic ministries, or as Christians living in the world, we have to have a certain inefficiency about things. And maybe there's that shrine in the desert that is no longer cost-effective, and it takes more money to keep that up than it does to build a new, more modern-looking church or whatever. But there may be something to be said for just having, like I said, a kind of inefficiency, pearl at great price. And I think the same could be said for even our soup kitchens or whatever it happens to be.
Right. If we get too in love with an idea saving the world, or if we get too in love with a bottom line, this many people made it through, we miss the virtue, which is to say we as both individuals but then a body, right? Like the body which is this town, this church in this place, have reached out to other bodies, the bodies of individuals that come through. But then also, right, like anybody we serve is a community. And again, this goes back to what we heard last week, where Chris points out people are looking for communities, and if they don't have real ones that are good, they're going to go find bad ones, and they're going to go be a community of drug addicts. They're going to be a community of racists. They're going to be a community of this, that, or the other, and that it's cruel to look at them joining these communities and go, why did you make an individual bad choice? And you go, well, no, they didn't make an individual bad choice. They were answering basic human needs and desires that we failed at providing for them.
Yeah, once bocce ball went away. No, I'm joking.
I don't think we, as bad as we are at bocce ball, should be the headliners about returning it. But I think there's something to that. A kid walking around in South Des Moines looks at a bocce ball court and doesn't know what it is. Then there's a Monsignor out there somewhere shedding a tear because they should know, right? They should know.
Well, I know we're up against the break, but you mentioned Bill Kavanaugh and some of his work. He has a book called Migrations of the Holy, and what you were just talking about, Bo, reminded me of what he has to say. We're committed to the truth, and it's expressed fully in the Catholic faith. And whenever we drop the ball there, whenever sloth or greed or whatever gets in the way of embodying the gospel, normally the human desire for happiness will push towards another vacuum, and it will enter another place.
No, absolutely. This is The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We're going to keep this rolling, maybe really get into the Gnosticism of bureaucratic institutions when we get after the break. But continue this talk about being incarnational in an incarnational and non-abstract way. This is The Uncommon Good. We'll be right back after this. But, one temptation to be Gnostic in the world is when you interact online. We've talked about this before. But we try here at Iowa Catholic Radio to be incarnational as possible as we can online. So that means we don't see our online presence as merely in and of itself, but as a conduit or a goal to try to get you involved in what Iowa Catholic Radio does and in coming up and talking to us and being with us as we are in and out of the community. So, Bud, people, if they want to, they can go to Facebook and friend us there, Iowa Catholic Radio. They can like us on Twitter at IA Catholic Radio. And then they can go online, iowacatholicradio.com, sign up for our email, keep abreast of what's going on air and in person, and we hope to see them in the flesh so that they can be a part of our ministry. So, this is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. We'll be back right after.
When you donate to CTO, you're helping more and more families send their kids to Catholic school. That's great because more and more families qualify for tuition assistance every year. Your generosity makes a huge difference for thousands of families and kids who really need help. Plus, your donation qualifies you for great tax credits. Want to help? Please donate at ctoiowa.org. Let's do this for the kids and their future.
Are you struggling with drugs or alcohol? Have the same old programs led you to the same old places? Welcome to St. Gregory Recovery Center, the new standard for recovery. St. Gregory is a faith-based program located just outside of Des Moines. Our unique non-12-step approach is different than most other programs. We're designed to help you strengthen your body, mind, and spirit. Don't let your addiction define you. It's time to get you excited about life again. For more information, on the phone, 888-724-3342. That's 888-724-3342.
Hey friends, John Leonetti here. Big thanks to R&R Realty Group for underwriting my show and for their support of Iowa Catholic Radio. R&R Realty Group Sierra Point Apartments are located in West Des Moines. Think granite tops, oversized windows, 24-hour health center, and heated underground parking. R&R Realty Group is locally owned by a Catholic family, a great blessing to Iowa Catholic Radio. rrrealty.com. That's rrrealty.com. Thank you, Caldwell Parish, for underwriting Iowa Catholic Radio. Conform to the wishes of the deceased and to Catholic liturgical burial traditions. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home. CaldwellParish.com.
Classical, flexible, Catholic. Catholic Schoolhouse. Homeschool success through a classical approach. For more information, visit CatholicSchoolhouse.com. That's CatholicSchoolhouse.com. This message was brought to you by Savage Power.
Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr coming to you this Wednesday, continuing to talk about being incarnational. The idea has been the last few weeks, we've been talking about subjects that the thread holding them all together has been the incarnation. But I was going back with Charles Camosi, but if you really want to talk about it, I think this started when we were talking about Jean Vanier and the L'Arche communities. He passed away, and so we did an episode to honor him. We had Charles Camosi with his book, Resisting Throwaway Culture. We then talked about retirement in the common good, and actually I think that has more to do with this than we realized. We talked about charity, pity, philanthropy, and ultimate self-interest. Last week we got a chance to talk with Chris Arnatti about his book, Dignity. And so we go, look, incarnation and how that works out. What does it mean to be incarnational? And if we're going to not fall afoul of our very own warning, which means we shouldn't abstract and be Gnostic about these things, it's important to talk about what the incarnation is, its ramifications for how we act, and what it means to not think about this abstractly, but, so to speak, put meat on the bones of this word. So we've been talking about that today. So, Bud, with this next segment of the show, maybe talk more about what we mean by Gnosticism. You brought up that people like Harold Bloom and other commentators have noted the tendency in the United States to be Gnostic. So maybe real quick, what were the Gnostics, and why is that still a pervasive problem, or even uniquely in the United States?
Well, I think Gnosticism goes back to Neoplatonism, but there were a strand of Gnostics who looked to Christ for inspiration, but I think they fundamentally misunderstood his message, and salvation became for them, as you were hinting at in the first part of the show, Bo, a matter of having a certain kind of knowledge. And in some cases, for the Gnostics, it was even this secret kind of knowledge, so you would be initiated into it, sort of like Freemasons do today, and that led to a disregard for the importance of the body and embodiedness. Weirdly, some Gnostics were libertines when it came to sexual morality, where they said, it doesn't matter what you do with your body, so you can be promiscuous or you can be a glutton or whatnot. And then there were others who disciplined the body in severe ways because they wanted to overcome their bodily passions and access. Gnostics would talk about this spark of divinity, which was the true person, and salvation would be a matter of being liberated from the prison of your body and being drawn into this kind of mystic union with all that is.
Now, what's interesting, right, is so you say, how does this appear in the United States? And if you start to look at American history long enough, it really does seem to be this sort of violent back-and-forth pendulum between something like the Puritans, right? So the temperance movement, or this really great sort of grave asceticism. This idea, you hear this mythology of the United States that what we are and what made us American is we gave up all of these niceties of civilization back in Europe. We came to the new land and we forged ahead and we settled it. And, we ate like briars for dinner, right? And took no enjoyment, but by God made Omaha or whatever, right? And there's sort of a whole group of literature that arises around that. The other narrative America, narrative America, is that like we are one everlasting party of debauchery, and that what we did was we left Europe and founded a place like Dodge City or Big Whiskey, Wyoming, or Las Vegas, and we've been figuring out how to have a good time perpetually ever since. Neon lights, fast food, and you start to see, right, that America somehow tries to hold together these two wildly divergent ideas about themselves, and I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a Gnosticism behind it. The body either is the worst thing possible or doesn't matter, and that there's a secret knowledge, right, behind this sort of story, that really you are yourself detached from your body, and either you need to absolutely overcome it, or you either can just completely do whatever you want, but there's a real you that somehow doesn't actually encounter the world. And the way that we've sort of manifested now is to try to do both. And this is where I think we start. You hear people complain about bureaucracy a lot and bureaucrats, but I don't think we actually are very incarnational and concrete about the problem with bureaucracy. So bureaucracy, it's not necessarily a problem that you work in a building or that you're behind cubicles. It's not anything like that. That just sounds like we're complaining about what we think someone's job's like. The problem starts to be that there is this you that really doesn't have to, when it's doing business or government work or even church work, have to encounter other bodies, other individuals. So bureaucracy sort of mixes both of these myths about the United States. On one hand, it defers responsibility not with one single person or another, but diffusely throughout an entire organization. And anybody who's ever tried to figure out who do I need to talk to in order to get on another plane after my flight's been canceled understands this aspect of bureaucracy. Who's in charge? And you keep getting, thrown this, that, and the other. And, I mean, technically, right, the CEO of an airliner would be in charge, but it's not like there you are in the airport, I need to go talk to the king of whatever airline to get to the bottom of this. The bottom of this is precisely the point. There is no bottom of this. There's no body that you can go and encounter to actually confront about all these things, and bureaucracy means to do that. But on the other hand, right, because it's sort of austere, right? You get Kafkaesque understandings of the bureaucracy. Who do I talk to? It's all impersonal, all of these things like this. But then I can also live a very indulgent life after I leave at 5 o'clock. You hear all sorts of people wrestling with this idea, right, that who I am at work is not who I am at home. And even though most of us work more hours per week than we actually spend at home, we'll go no. What do I do in my business? That's something else. Who I am is what I buy or what I like or what I do away from work. And so bureaucracy in this strange way, bud, is like the perfect embodiment of American style, of the American style of two divergent Gnosticisms.
Yeah, we have to be careful because I'm not trying to say that the itinerant Methodist preacher on the frontier was, qua by definition, a Gnostic. But I think Harold Bloom was right in that American-style revivalism, if you look at how it presents salvation, there's a decision, usually kind of an intellectual signing on to a certain kind of commitment that takes place, and that's one moment in time. And then you hear the music that builds up around it, and you have hymns like I'll Fly Away, One Sweet Day. And so what's kind of lost in that whole viewpoint is, well, what happens between the conversion experience and flying away? And as Catholics, we have to be careful of that mindset seeping into our faith, because Christ promised that we can experience abundant life now. So I don't think the vision of the New Testament is one of fire insurance where St. Peter scans your barcode at the pearly gates and then you experience a greater reality. The Mass is the inbreaking of heaven, and our experience of glory only passes through participation in Christ's suffering. So that love has to be a passion in both senses of the word.
I think you're exactly right. And the way we start to see this inscribed in the United States is even this idea, right, that there's cities where you go do debauchery, and then there's cities where you go do business, and then there's cities where you live.
What happens in Des Moines stays in Des Moines.
Right. Well, it's actually it's the opposite, right? In Des Moines, everyone knows, but if you want to go somewhere, you're exactly like you're pointing out, that no one needs to find out, there's Las Vegas if you have, enough money.
I thought you were going to say Council Bluffs.
Yeah, no, right. If you're Iowa, it's Council Bluffs. If you're poor in Oklahoma, it's Bossier City, Bossier City, Louisiana, Shreveport if you have a little more money. But you start to see this, right? There's places that you go. And then, to really make this a big deal about white flight, or you start talking about gentrification or how these things work. I went with students and visited the United Nations a few weeks ago, and everybody works in Manhattan. Hardly anyone lives there. People will commute 2 to 3 hours to go be their work self and then go back home to their Gnostic self that has nothing to do with that. This idea that, even we organize our lives bureaucratically, right? There's the proper section that you do things. I think what would really surprise people, and I think American Catholics even encounter this, when they go see, really ultra Catholic places that have been Catholic a long time, that it can kind of surprise them. You think about New Orleans, how that comes across to a lot of people, and of course, right, very fringe, very Catholic city. But also, I think people would be surprised about how close in proximity the holy and the profane interact in New Orleans. But I think that, to be fair, they meant to do that architecturally. There was a moment last week in Chris's podcast where he points out that it didn't really come across in the book, but for people like us, it should be obvious. He takes a picture of a sex worker who, really points out that, like, she still has dignity, right, that she's a child of God, but where is she taking this picture? It's on the street where she actually encounters a lot of the sex work that she does, right in front of a monastery in, a very depressed part of the Bronx. And, what's strange is it seems to me in the Catholic mindset, that all makes sense. Not that, of course, there should be people with no money or people who ran into the sex trade. I'm not saying anything silly like that. But to say that sinners and saints, that the sacred and the profane in this incarnational way butt into each other all the time is precisely what we want. We want sinners, even in the midst of their sin, to have the chance to be a part of the body of Christ at any moment. The bureaucratic mindset, the Gnostic one, compartmentalizes everything and goes, no, you do your sitting in that city, you do your entertainment in that city, you do your work in that city, and you live in that city, and none of these will ever meet. And I think that's a very telling image of what we're talking about.
Well, Bo, if I could shift the conversation a bit, and you stop me if I'm out of line, because I'm not trying to just go out of my way to criticize something, but I've been watching with interest the recent meeting of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And one conversation that came up there reminded me a bit of this bureaucratic mindset that you've been mentioning. And that is, rightly so, the bishops were asking themselves, why do so many young Catholics end up leaving the church and not coming back?
Right.
Someone shared a statistic that 50% of young people leaving the Catholic Church become unaffiliated. And so the bishop's Twitter handle actually posed this question, saying, if you're a young Catholic who's still Catholic, what has made you stay?
Right.
And if you want some entertaining reading, it's pretty good stuff, the responses they got. But
Yeah,
I think that question is coming from an authentic place from the bishops, and I want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're genuinely concerned. I think the danger there, though, is the USCCB, which is a kind of bureaucracy, for better or worse. Probably for worse. I think there's a temptation, and maybe this captures a lot of us who are involved in some form of ministry, to want to find the silver bullet that will convince people to stay.
Right.
And I guess with this incarnational perspective that we're talking about, I don't think there's a silver bullet, and if there was, it'd probably be hand-delivered by Satan.
Right.
Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to pass on the faith, and that's a deposit of faith, that's doctrine. That's also the devotions that have been built up around the lives of those who most authentically followed Christ. And so, it's just funny as Catholics, we get bogged down with these questions when we have St. Therese, and we have the true relics of the cross, and we have Chartres Cathedral, and all this chant that built up around the Mass, and we keep saying, what internet platform can we use that the kids will find cool?
No, the way you put it, this is great. The best answer I saw to that post was the grace of God every day. That's what keeps me Catholic, is the grace of God every day, which is truly the only answer, it seems to me, because everything else falls into, if not Pelagianism, this idea that we can sort of save ourselves, it falls back into what we've been saying this entire time. Gnostic knowledge ends up being bureaucratic knowledge because we either act like there's an egghead solution or that it's busy, pragmatic work. We sort of get bogged down into the busy work of the soul, that's what we start to do. And like you said, none of this has to be you're malfeasant or evil, and that's why you're doing this. For a lot of us, this is the only way to operate. How many of you could even imagine having a job where there was not some sort of bureaucratic apparatus? I mean, this is the way we live. This is why Bloom's right to say it's not that people are running around, saying Gnostic creeds, but if the form of life drips with Gnosticism, because we can't even imagine what it would look like to be different. And so when we come up with problems, even with the faith, we say, well, what's the real practical, pragmatic thing, the utilitarian thing we can do to keep kids in the faith? And, it's like you said, it's not that it misses the point out of sort of malice, but that it shows you where we're at thinking about it. And so the theological answer is grace. the sort of the peasant faith answer is prayer and fasting. And I was happy to say that I saw this, that for a while they got the bishops got on a tangent for about 5 minutes talking about the amazing work adoration does. I thanked God that got brought up, right? That what you actually need to do is give young people the space to adore Christ in the Eucharist and confession, right? Adoration and confession. You keep hearing these refrains constantly, and you go, there's hope. Of course there's hope, and if only people would hear that. But I think even the best of us will go like, yeah, that's all good, but what do we really need to do? Because instead of being incarnational, we try to be practical, pragmatic, utilitarian, which is just one side of the Gnostic coin, the sort of sloth acedia one, whereas the other one is, what is the big final silver bullet solution that we cooked up in our lab and that we're going to top-down deliver to everyone else? And I love how you put that. The devil is both in the details and in the big solutions, right? That's where the devil works. The details, the big solution, anxiety and arrogance, and the incarnation is to say, no, we have to be there with people in the flesh. And if you haven't been there in the flesh with young people, you're not going to figure out the silver bullet or the details.
Yeah, we talked about this passage a few weeks ago, but the one where Jesus says the children of this world are smarter than the sons of God. Or
right.
I'm paraphrasing.
Yes.
But we need to use, it's good to use what's in front of us to evangelize. And so our show has a Twitter handle, and I see that, Bo, as kind of the principalities and the powers.
Right.
Christ defeats them by disarming them. And so podcast might be a principality, but we're going to use it to share the faith. To give you some props, if I could give you a shout out on air. I really appreciated the fact when you first came to Mercy College that you said we're going to have Mass each week regardless of the numbers that are there, because what we're asking, what we're drawing people into, what we're inviting them to is to commune with God. So we might have a fun grill out for students, but we're not going to give them the impression that that's the totality of things, because their happiness will ultimately find in encountering the risen Christ, right?
Right.
And so the foundation has to be the infleshed encounter with God, which is one of communion with other Christians, even if we're shrewd about how we use the tools in front of us.
No, that's right. I do think it's funny. I'm imagining now like it's like before human history starts and the principalities and powers are all like giving reports to the devil about what they plan to do, and then here's social media, and all the other demons are like, who's social media? And they're like, don't worry, it's going to take a while, but when this principality and power comes up, boy howdy, are people going to be ran astray by it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I also think with in line with what you're talking about, with what we need to do and what we count as successes, we hear people talking about encounter and empathy a lot. We can go on the words, all words that really should point away from abstractions that have become absolute abstractions. What does it mean to encounter someone? Well, either the definition is like really simple, literally you encounter them, like you bump up against them. Empathy, you try to feel someone else's pain, or at least not feel it, but like live beside it. But now we talk about empathy and encounter as if they're nouns that are abstract nouns. What do we count as a success? Sometimes it's literally just to say, do we get in the same room as the people that we say are important? Do we get in the room with young people? Do we get in the same room as poor people? Encounter the Lord. Do we have the Lord in the tabernacle where people can encounter him? And so, yeah, like if in the end, with Mercy College and me being here, if anybody goes, what did you accomplish? I'm going to say, hey, we have the Eucharist in the chapel. Christ is here. People can encounter him if they so choose. So I appreciate the shout-out, but I think that's our prophetic call that we have to make here, Bud, is to say we can't abstract the very words that fight against abstraction, or the devil is just clearly being clever enough to gnaw on the sort of Gnostic edges of our heart and get people to be led astray. So we're running out of time, Bud, so I'm going to go ahead and say, for Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our family, in our city, our state, our country, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back next week. But if people want to incarnately be involved with what's going on here at Iowa Catholic Radio, what's a way that through prayer they can join us in the ministry that we have going on here?
You can join us in prayer by praying the Rosary with us. That takes place at 9:30 a.m. and 9:30 p.m. We also pray the Angelus together at 6 a.m.
Man, that's fantastic. There's other ways that you can be involved. We just got done last week with the golf outing. Thank you, everybody who was involved with that. Like we pointed out before, neither Bud nor I was harmed or played golf at the golf outing, because both of those would be a travesty to the entire human race. One way that we can make sure to be incarnational is, of course, we covet your prayers to help us with our ministry here at Iowa Catholic Radio. But then there's also the sort of body, bones, blood, sinews, joints of the whole thing, which means to say that if we want to continue things like the golf outing, Man Up, the Mosaic Lunches, all the things that we practically do, we do need your help. And not only do we get your help from prayers and volunteering, but also through monetary gifts. You give of your sustenance. If we're talking about being embodied, there's no better way to show that you care about something than, as the saying goes, put your money where your mouth is, which is not, of course, hear us saying like any sort of dare or anything, but to say we know people care about this place, this ministry. We've seen it. And so if you're so encouraged, we ask you to go to iowacatholicradio.com, where it's easy to donate, the donate button, or you can call 515-223-1150, or even on the ZipWhip line, leave a text and you can donate that way as well. But we want to thank everyone. We had our summer maintenance thing a while ago. We appreciate everybody who gave, and we look forward to people being a part of this ministry. Bud, it's been great. I hope you have a wonderful week, my friend.
I just have to say real quickly, I loved we were not harmed because we did not golf.
That's right.
So I'm undefeated in mixed martial arts as well.
Because you've never participated?
I've never fought.
Oh, that's great. Well, for Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. This is the Uncommon Good. God bless, and we'll see you all next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.